Medieval Europe was a complex tapestry of social roles, professions, and spiritual pursuits, each woven into the broader fabric of daily life, survival, and belief. Among the most distinctive vocations were those of monks, healers, and blacksmiths. These roles shaped not only the material and spiritual existence of medieval communities, but also the rhythm, meaning, and hierarchy of daily life. Understanding their work offers insight into how medieval society functioned, how knowledge and skill were transmitted, and how personal identity was shaped by vocation. Monks occupied a unique place in medieval life, straddling spiritual devotion, intellectual labor, and community leadership. They were men who had chosen or were guided by family expectations to dedicate themselves to the religious life, withdrawing from secular affairs to pursue a structured existence of prayer, study, and service. Monastic life was defined by strict routines, communal obligations, and a deep integration of spiritual and practical labor. From the early morning chant to evening reflection, the daily life of a monk was punctuated by ritual, work, and learning, creating a rhythm that was both disciplined and deeply meaningful. The choice to become a monk was influenced by multiple factors. Some entered the monastery out of genuine religious calling, seeking spiritual enlightenment, penance, or the closeness of God. Others were sent by families for social, economic, or political reasons, particularly younger sons who would not inherit land or titles. Regardless of motivation, monastic life required adjustment to communal living, obedience to rules, and a rigorous commitment to both spiritual and practical tasks. The rule of Saint Benedict, widely followed in Western Europe, provided a framework that emphasized balance between prayer, work, and study, ensuring that monks contributed to both their own spiritual development and the welfare of the wider community. Healers, by contrast, occupied a more ambiguous and highly varied position. Some were formally trained physicians, educated in the universities of medieval Europe or in traditions passed down from Greek and Arabic medicine. Others were folk healers, women and men who gained knowledge through apprenticeship, observation, and experience. Healers combined empirical observation, herbal knowledge, spiritual practice, and at times ritualized techniques in order to diagnose and treat illness. Their work was essential to the survival and well-being of communities, particularly in an era when disease was rampant and medical knowledge limited. A healer's reputation could determine whether a village thrived or struggled, and their skills were often sought across social boundaries from peasants to nobility. Blacksmiths were central to the physical and economic fabric of medieval life. They worked with iron and other metals, producing tools, weapons, agricultural implements, and household objects. The blacksmith's forge was a place of heat, skill, and transformation, where raw material was shaped by hammer, fire, and an intimate understanding of metallurgy. Their labor was physically demanding and technically sophisticated. A skilled blacksmith could influence both the economic efficiency and the defensive capability of a community, as tools enabled agriculture and craft, while weapons ensured protection and power. The blacksmith's social position was thus both practical and symbolic, linking the survival of daily life to human ingenuity and mastery of the material world. Despite their differences, monks, healers, and blacksmiths shared common threads that defined medieval vocation. All required specialized knowledge, technical skill, and a disciplined approach to their craft. All were embedded within broader social and economic networks, interacting with the peasantry, nobility, and religious authorities. And all were subject to the ethical, moral, and spiritual expectations of the time, whether through vows of obedience, codes of conduct, or communal norms. Their work was not merely a means of subsistence, it was a source of identity, influence, and purpose. The daily rhythm of these vocations was shaped by both necessity and belief. Monks divided the day between prayer, study, and labor, often rising before dawn to chant the psalms, working in scriptoriums or tending gardens. and dedicating evenings to meditation. Healers balanced the demands of urgent care with the careful study of plants, texts, and the humoral theory of the body. Blacksmiths regulated their work by market demands, agricultural cycles, and military needs, adjusting their craft to both community requirements and environmental conditions. Each vocation required adaptability, patience, and a profound respect for the natural and spiritual orders in which their work was situated. Monasteries, healers' huts, and forges also served as centers of knowledge, tradition, and innovation. Monks preserved and copied texts, transmitting classical, religious, and scientific knowledge across generations. Healers experimented with remedies, recorded observations, and integrated diverse medical traditions, forming the basis of early medical understanding. Blacksmiths refined tools, experimented with alloys, and developed techniques that improved both craft and defense. In each case, the combination of practical skill and accumulated knowledge ensured that medieval communities could survive, adapt, and flourish in an often challenging environment. The social perception of these vocations was closely tied to their contributions and perceived spiritual or moral significance. Monks were respected as moral exemplars and keepers of wisdom. Healers were valued for life-saving skill but sometimes feared for associations with magic or the supernatural. Blacksmiths were admired for strength, skill, and indispensable utility. These reputations shaped interactions, trust, and influence, illustrating how vocation was inseparable from social identity, ethical expectation, and cultural meaning. In conclusion, the medieval vocations of monk, healer, and blacksmith represent distinct yet interconnected dimensions of life in Europe between the early and late Middle Ages. Each involved rigorous training, disciplined labor, and social embeddedness, providing both material and spiritual sustenance to the communities they served. By examining their work, routines, and social roles, we gain insight into how medieval Europeans structured their lives, cultivated skill, and understood the relationship between labor, knowledge, and moral responsibility. The following parts will explore each vocation in depth, tracing daily life, education, social interaction, challenges, and legacy, providing a vivid portrait of life as a monk, healer, or blacksmith in the medieval world. Monastic life in medieval Europe was defined by routine, discipline, and devotion. Unlike other members of society, monks withdrew from the secular world to dedicate themselves entirely to the service of God, the preservation of knowledge, and the well-being of their communities. Their lives were structured around the canonical hours, a sequence of prayers, readings, and meditations that marked the rhythm of the day and night. From the moment a monk awoke, each action was aligned with spiritual and communal purpose. The day began before sunrise, often in darkness and silence, with the first prayer service known as matins or vigils. This early hour demanded alertness and spiritual focus, setting the tone for the remainder of the day. Following the initial prayers, monks participated in lauds, a morning service that included psalms, hymns, and readings from Scripture. These rituals were not merely ceremonial. They provided spiritual nourishment, reinforced communal identity, and reminded the monks of their lifelong commitment to obedience, humility, and piety. After morning prayers, monks engaged in manual labor, critical component of monastic life. Labor ranged from gardening and farming to maintenance of buildings, copying manuscripts, brewing or preparing food. Manual work was considered a form of devotion, a practical manifestation of spiritual discipline. Labor allowed monks to sustain their communities, contribute to the welfare of neighboring villages, and maintain a connection to the physical world while nurturing humility and focus. Work was performed with precision and mindfulness, often interwoven with silent prayer or meditative reflection. Midday prayer, known as sext, punctuated the workday. Monks would gather in the chapel or designated spaces to chant, read scripture, or recite psalms. Meals followed, often consisting of simple fare, bread, vegetables, cheese, and occasionally fish, particularly on fasting days. Meals were consumed in silence or accompanied by readings from religious texts, reinforcing the union of physical nourishment with spiritual reflection. The simplicity of food emphasized moderation, discipline, and reliance on God rather than indulgence or excess. The afternoon was devoted to additional labor, study, or teaching. Monks engaged in copying manuscripts, illuminating texts, or compiling knowledge that preserved classical, religious, and scientific learning. Scriptoriums were centers of intellectual labor, where attention to detail, patience, and devotion were essential. Education within the monastery was both spiritual and practical, encompassing theology, philosophy, medicine, mathematics, and language, reflecting the monastic commitment to understanding God's creation and transmitting knowledge across generations. Vespers, the evening prayer, marked the close of the working day. Monks gathered to chant psalms, offer prayers of thanksgiving, and reflect on their duties and conduct. Evening meals were modest, followed by compline, the final prayer service before retiring. Sleep was regulated and communal, reinforcing discipline and maintaining the rhythm of the canonical hours. Silence and contemplation were encouraged during the night, allowing for meditation, private prayer, and preparation for the next day. Monks' lives were characterized by communal living and obedience. Individual desires were subordinated to the needs of the community, and decisions were guided by the abbot or prior, the heads of the monastery. Obedience was not mere compliance. It was considered a spiritual practice that fostered humility, self-awareness, and alignment with divine will. Community responsibilities extended beyond the cloister walls, including hospitality to travelers, aid to the poor, and the provision of education or healthcare, making monasteries centers of both spiritual and social support. Fasting and austerity were integral to monastic discipline. Meals were regulated by strict rules, often involving abstention from meat, dairy, or indulgent foods, particularly on holy days. These practices cultivated self-control, heightened spiritual awareness, and aligned personal habits with the ethical teachings of the Church. Monks also engaged in occasional pilgrimage, spiritual retreats, or participation in liturgical feasts, connecting personal devotion with broader ecclesiastical life. Despite the rigor of their schedules, monks experienced moments of personal reflection and intellectual engagement. Reading, writing, meditative prayer, and contemplation offered space for personal growth, moral reasoning, and spiritual insight. These activities were encouraged as a way to cultivate virtue, deepen understanding, and develop the patience and focus necessary for both spiritual and communal life. The life of a monk was demanding, requiring balance between labor, study, and devotion. It offered purpose, structure, and an opportunity for spiritual growth while contributing materially and intellectually to the wider society. Through prayer, work, and scholarship, monks preserved knowledge, nurtured faith, and modeled a disciplined, morally guided existence that influenced both the secular and spiritual spheres of medieval Europe. In conclusion, monastic life was defined by a harmonious integration of spiritual practice, manual labor, and intellectual pursuit. Monks adhered to strict routines and communal obligations while cultivating personal devotion, moral discipline, and practical skills. Their daily rhythm from the pre-dawn prayers to evening reflection reinforced the values of obedience, humility, and service, creating a life of both spiritual fulfillment and tangible contribution to the medieval world. Healers in medieval Europe occupied a unique and essential role, bridging practical knowledge, spiritual insight, and empirical observation. Unlike monks, whose lives were structured by communal discipline and spiritual devotion, healers worked within the unpredictable rhythms of illness, injury, and disease. Their work required extensive training, a deep understanding of human health, and the ability to navigate both social expectation and superstition. The education and daily duties of a healer combined hands-on experience, study of texts, and often apprenticeship under established practitioners. Education for healers varied widely depending on social class, access to resources, and geographic location. In some cases, healers received formal instruction in universities or monastic schools, studying the medical theories of Galen, Hippocrates, and later Arabic physicians, such as Avicenna. These scholars learned anatomy, pharmacology, and surgical techniques, often relying on textual knowledge rather than empirical experimentation. In rural areas or among the peasantry, knowledge was passed down orally or through apprenticeship, with healers observing the use of herbs, poultices, and other remedies practiced by experienced family members or local practitioners. Training emphasized both theoretical knowledge and practical skills. Young apprentices learned to identify medicinal plants, prepare tinctures and salves, and understand dietary and lifestyle interventions. They were instructed in the principles of humoral theory, which dominated medieval medicine, emphasizing balance among blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health was understood as a delicate equilibrium, with illness arising from imbalance, and treatment aimed at restoring harmony through diet, herbs, bloodletting, or spiritual intervention. Healers were often expected to integrate spiritual practice with medical treatment. Prayer, ritual, and blessing were considered as important as physical remedies, particularly in cases of chronic or mysterious illness. Some healers specialized in exorcisms or the removal of curses, blending religious authority with practical knowledge. This dual approach reflected the medieval worldview where physical, spiritual, and moral realms were interconnected, and a healer's credibility depended on mastery of both. Daily duties of a healer were highly varied and often unpredictable. They responded to injuries from farming accidents, wounds from combat, and the everyday ailments of children, elderly, and laborers. Treatments included the application of herbal poultices, wound care, massage, and dietary recommendations. In more severe cases, healers performed minor surgical procedures, set broken bones, or assisted midwives during childbirth. Knowledge of anatomy, though limited, was refined through observation and experience, and healers developed skill in improvisation and adaptation to the needs of individual patients. Record-keeping and observation were important components of a healer's work. Some maintained journals of treatments, noting which remedies were effective or harmful. Others passed knowledge orally, embedding their findings in communal memory and familial teaching. Observation of seasonal patterns, local epidemics, and the effects of diet and environment informed their practice, creating a dynamic body of practical knowledge that evolved with experience. Socially, healers occupied an ambiguous position. They were highly respected for their skill and life-saving abilities, but could also be viewed with suspicion due to associations with magic, superstition, or unconventional practices. Their effectiveness often depended on reputation, personal conduct, and the trust they built within their community. Wealthier patients might seek healers who had studied classical texts, while common folk relied on locally known practitioners. A healer's influence thus spanned multiple social strata, creating a network of dependence and mutual respect. Healers were also integrally connected to childbirth and midwifery, assisting in deliveries, advising on prenatal care, and ensuring the health of both mother and child were central duties. Women often served as midwives and herbalists, passing down their expertise through generations, while men might provide surgical interventions or pharmacological knowledge. Collaboration between healers, clergy, and families reinforced both practical and moral frameworks of care. In addition to individual care, healers often participated in public health management. During epidemics, they advised communities on hygiene, isolation of the sick, and treatment of contagious conditions. Their role in preventing and mitigating outbreaks, though limited by contemporary understanding, was critical in protecting populations. Healers combined knowledge of herbal medicine, dietetics, and environmental factors, helped communities navigate the persistent threat of disease. In conclusion, the life of a medieval healer was characterized by a balance of practical skill, observational knowledge, and spiritual insight. Training combined apprenticeship, textual study, and experiential learning, while daily duties required adaptability, empathy, and technical competence. Healers occupied a central role in the health and well-being of medieval communities, bridging the gap between science, faith, and social trust. Their work shaped not only individual survival but also the broader resilience of the medieval population, reflecting a nuanced understanding of human health that integrated body, spirit, and society. Blacksmiths were indispensable figures in medieval society, shaping metal into tools, weapons, and everyday objects that sustained both the economy and daily life. Their work combined physical strength, technical skill, and creative problem-solving, making the blacksmith's forge a central hub of craft, commerce, and community interaction. Life as a blacksmith was demanding, structured by the rhythms of labor, the requirements of customers, and the constraints of fire, metal, and tools. Training to become a blacksmith typically began in childhood or adolescence. Young apprentices, often sons of blacksmiths or those placed in the trade through local guilds, spent years learning the craft under the supervision of a master. They started with basic tasks such as tending the fire, fetching water, preparing materials, and maintaining tools. Gradually, they progressed to hammering, shaping, and tempering metal, learning the properties of iron, steel, and other alloys through hands-on experience. Apprenticeship was long and rigorous, often lasting 7 years or more, and emphasized both technical mastery and moral discipline, including punctuality, obedience, and honesty. The forge was the heart of the blacksmith's world. Its intense heat, the roar of the bellows, and the rhythmic pounding of hammer on metal defying daily life. Work began at sunrise, with the first task being the lighting and management of the fire. Maintaining a constant and controllable temperature was essential, as metals required precise heating to be shaped, hardened, or welded. Blacksmiths developed an intimate understanding of the interplay between heat, pressure, and material properties, knowledge accumulated over years of practice and observation. Daily work varied according to seasonal and social demands. In rural villages, blacksmiths primarily produced and repaired agricultural tools, plows, hoes, scythes, and nails, ensuring the efficiency and productivity of farms. In towns and cities, they might create household implements, hardware, and decorative ironwork. During times of conflict, blacksmiths were essential in producing weapons, armor, and horseshoes, making their skills crucial to both defense and offense. Their work required not only strength but precision, as poorly forged weapons or tools could be dangerous or ineffective. The blacksmith's role extended beyond technical skill to social and economic engagement. Customers relied on the blacksmith for timely and reliable service, and reputation was vital to securing ongoing commissions. Negotiation, assessment of needs, and adaptation to local resources were part of the daily routine. Blacksmiths also interacted with other artisans, coordinating efforts in construction, carpentry, or trade, contributing to the broader infrastructure of the community. Health and safety were constant concerns. The forge's heat, heavy tools, and sparks posed significant risks. Blacksmiths had to develop stamina, dexterity, and attention to detail to avoid injury. Over time, physical labor shaped the body, building muscular strength and endurance. Though the work was taxing, it was also deeply rewarding, providing tangible results and a sense of mastery over raw materials. The blacksmith's social role was multifaceted. Beyond their economic contribution, they served as problem solvers, innovators, and keepers of craft knowledge. Techniques were often passed down through apprenticeship, family lineage, or guild instruction. Blacksmiths experimented with alloys, tempering methods, and tool design, sometimes producing innovations that enhanced agricultural efficiency, military capability, or domestic convenience. Their creativity and expertise were both practical and highly respected. Guilds, where they existed, formalized training, regulated quality, and protected the interests of blacksmiths. Membership required demonstration of skill, ethical conduct, and sometimes the payment of fees or contributions to communal resources. Guilds also organized communal celebrations, festivals, and religious observances, linking craft, social life, and spiritual practice. Through guilds, blacksmiths could achieve both security and recognition, enhancing their influence within the community. Work at the forge was rhythmically structured. Early hours were often devoted to urgent repairs or preparation of metal. Midday might involve crafting complex items. Afternoons could be spent on finishing, polishing, or decoration. Evenings often included maintenance of tools, replenishment of stock, or instruction of apprentices. The cyclical nature of agricultural seasons, local markets, and religious festivals influenced workload, creating periods of intense activity followed by quieter times. In conclusion, life as a blacksmith combined physical labor, technical skill, social engagement, and creative problem-solving. Training required years of apprenticeship, guided by masters, and reinforced through hands-on experience. Daily routines were demanding and carefully structured, with the forge serving as a center of craft commerce and communal life. Blacksmiths were essential to the survival, defense, and prosperity of medieval communities, shaping the material world through their knowledge, skill, and dedication. Their work exemplified the integration of labor, artistry, and social responsibility that defined medieval vocational life. Monks, healers, and blacksmiths did not exist in isolation. Their daily work and specialized skills intertwined closely with the lives of the wider medieval community. Each vocation held a distinct social role, exerted influence in different ways, and contributed to the survival, well-being, and cohesion of their villages, towns, or religious centers. Understanding these interactions illuminates how medieval society functioned as a network of interdependent roles, obligations, and mutual reliance. Monks were often the most visible representatives of spiritual and intellectual authority. Their monasteries functioned as centers of education, healthcare, hospitality, and economic management. Villagers and travelers could seek shelter, food, or advice, making monasteries integral to both spiritual and practical life. Monks provided guidance on moral issues, mediated disputes, and offered instruction in reading, writing, and prayer. Their authority was not enforced through coercion but derived from knowledge, religious devotion, and the ability to provide essential services, making them pillars of stability and guidance within the community. Healers, by contrast, operated on a more personal and immediate level. Villagers, peasants, and even nobility relied on healers to address daily ailments, injuries, and chronic conditions. Their influence stemmed from expertise and reputation, often built over years of successful treatment. A healer's presence could be reassuring, and their advice on hygiene, diet, and preventive care contributed to the overall health of a community. In smaller villages, a single healer might serve multiple roles: midwife, herbalist, surgeon, and advisor, blurring the line between professional and community member. Their authority was earned through skill and trust rather than formal title, and it could be undermined by failure, rumor, or suspicion of supernatural involvement. Blacksmiths held a crucial economic and practical influence. By producing tools, weapons, and implements essential to agriculture, construction, and defense, they ensured the material foundation of community life. Farmers relied on them for plows and hoes. Carpenters and builders needed nails, hinges, and brackets. Knights and soldiers depended on them for armor and weaponry. The blacksmith's work shaped the productivity, safety, and prosperity of the settlement. Beyond utility, their creations often carried symbolic weight. Finely crafted swords or ornamental gates displayed wealth, prestige, and communal pride, enhancing both their own reputation and that of their patrons. The relationships between these vocations and the broader community were also characterized by reciprocal obligation. Monks often received donations of labor or tithes in return for spiritual services and practical assistance. Healers might receive payment in coin, produce, or barter, reflecting the value of their labor in a largely agrarian economy. Blacksmiths, too, relied on commissions and local trade, creating networks of mutual dependency. These exchanges reinforced social cohesion, linking spiritual, medical, and material labor to communal well-being. Interactions between the three vocations could be collaborative. Monks occasionally acted as healers themselves, using herbal remedies cultivated in monastery gardens and integrating spiritual care with medical knowledge. Blacksmiths and healers worked together when crafting surgical instruments, splints, or tools necessary for treatment. In some towns, monasteries provided resources for blacksmiths or healers, such as access to water, space, or medicinal herbs. These cooperative networks exemplified the interdependence of medieval communities, where skill, labor, and knowledge were shared for mutual benefit. Cultural and social influence extended beyond immediate practical roles. Monks preserved knowledge through manuscript copying, education, and chronicling local events, influencing cultural memory and intellectual life. Healers contributed to the understanding of medicinal plants, treatments, and empirical observation, influencing health practices for generations. Blacksmiths advanced technology and craft, experimenting with metallurgy, improving tools, and enhancing military and agricultural capabilities. Each vocation, therefore, shaped not only daily life but also the long-term development and resilience of medieval society. These professions were also intertwined with ritual, celebration, and social hierarchy. Monks organized and participated in religious festivals and processions, shaping communal observance of holy days. Healers were called upon during crises, including plagues or epidemics, and were sometimes involved in ritual or spiritual practices associated with health. Blacksmiths played a role in preparing for seasonal events, fairs, and military campaigns, providing the material foundation for both celebration and protection. Their presence and labor were woven into the social and temporal rhythms of the community. Trust and reputation were central to each vocation's influence. A monk's authority depended on piety, learning, and moral example. A healer's effectiveness relied on skill, observation, and discretion. A blacksmith's credibility rested on craftsmanship, reliability, and ingenuity. Breaches of trust such as failed treatment, poorly forged tools, or moral transgression could damage standing and influence. Conversely, consistent competence and ethical conduct reinforced social cohesion, respect, and communal dependence. In conclusion, monks, healers, and blacksmiths were pillars of medieval society, each interacting with the wider community in unique and essential ways. They provided spiritual guidance, health care, and material support, shaping the physical, moral, and social fabric of daily life. Their work was embedded in networks of obligation, trust, and cooperation, demonstrating how specialized labor reinforced communal stability. Through these interactions, the medieval world functioned as an interdependent system where knowledge, skill, and moral responsibility intertwined to sustain survival, prosperity, and social harmony. Life as a monk, healer, or blacksmith was far from easy. Each vocation came with its own set of challenges, dangers, and societal pressures, demanding resilience, skill, and adaptability. The medieval world was unpredictable, marked by disease, warfare, economic uncertainty, and social expectation. Survival and success in any of these roles required navigating physical, social, and moral hazards while maintaining competence and reputation. Monks faced challenges inherent in their chosen way of life. The rigor of monastic discipline, early rising, fasting, manual labor, and constant prayer was physically and mentally demanding. Long hours of study, manuscript copying, or gardening strained eyesight, hands, and endurance. The strict observance of silence and obedience required psychological fortitude, particularly for those accustomed to secular freedoms. Failure to follow rules could result in punishment, spiritual censure, or social embarrassment within the monastic community. In addition, monks confronted external pressures. Monasteries depended on the support of lay patrons, nobles, and the church hierarchy. Political upheavals, shifting allegiances, and disputes over land or tithes could threaten resources and stability. Monks were sometimes called upon to mediate local conflicts, provide shelter during raids, or assist in crises, requiring diplomacy, courage, and practical problem-solving. Their spiritual authority could also attract criticism or suspicion, particularly if perceived as interfering in secular affairs. Healers faced a very different set of challenges. Illness and injury were unpredictable and often severe, making outcomes uncertain. A single misdiagnosis or failed treatment could endanger lives and damage reputations. Healers worked without modern sanitation, anesthesia, or antibiotics, increasing the risk of infection, complications, and patient mortality. They often confronted moral dilemmas: how to prioritize limited resources, how to treat contagious diseases without spreading harm, and how to balance spiritual beliefs with practical medical knowledge. Healers also faced social pressures rooted in suspicion and superstition. Women, in particular, could be accused of witchcraft or malevolent magic if treatments failed or if the community sought a scapegoat for illness. Male healers sometimes had to navigate conflicts between learned medical practices and local folk traditions, ensuring they maintained credibility while respecting cultural norms. The healer's effectiveness depended not only on knowledge but also on reputation, trust, and ethical judgment. Blacksmiths contended with physical dangers and technical demands. Working with fire, molten metal hammers, and heavy tools posed constant risks of burns, injury, or long-term physical strain. Poorly tempered metal could break under stress, causing harm or damage to those relying on the tools or weapons. Seasonal demands, particularly during harvest or military campaigns, intensified labor and increased the risk of accidents. Blacksmiths needed precise coordination of heat, force, and technique, leaving little room for error in an era with limited medical recourse for injuries. Economic pressures also weighed heavily on blacksmiths. Success depended on reputation, timely delivery, and customer satisfaction. Competition with other craftsmen or fluctuations in demand for tools, armor, or household goods could threaten livelihoods. In addition, blacksmiths were often responsible for the maintenance and management of their forges, including sourcing fuel, water, and metal, adding administrative burdens to physically demanding work. All three vocations were shaped by societal expectations. Monks were expected to exemplify spiritual virtue, humility, and obedience. Healers were expected to heal without malpractice, to combine skill with moral judgment, and to integrate spiritual or ritual knowledge. Blacksmiths were expected to produce durable, precise, and useful tools while maintaining ethical conduct in trade. Failure to meet these expectations could lead to social censure, loss of reputation, or exclusion from networks of support. Natural and external disasters presented universal risks. Epidemics, crop failures, floods, and warfare affected monks, healers, and blacksmiths alike. Monks might be called to provide refuge or aid during crises. Healers would face overwhelming patient loads, and blacksmiths might be tasked with urgent repairs to weapons or tools necessary for survival. Their responses were critical to the survival of the community and often tested endurance, skill, and resourcefulness. Psychological challenges were also significant. Monks dealt with isolation, internal doubts, and the struggle to maintain spiritual focus over decades. Healers confronted the emotional weight of suffering, death, and moral responsibility for patients. Blacksmiths endured fatigue, repetitive labor, and the constant pressure to meet community needs. Mastery of vocation required not only technical skill but also emotional resilience, patience, and adaptability. Despite these hardships, monks, healers, and blacksmiths developed strategies to mitigate risk and maintain effectiveness. Monks relied on routine, discipline, and communal support. Healers cultivated networks of advice, observation, and experimentation. Blacksmiths honed technique, maintained tools carefully, and passed knowledge to apprentices. In each case, mastery of challenges reinforced reputation, trust, and influence, demonstrating the interdependence of skill, social perception, and personal resilience. In conclusion, medieval life as a monk, healer, or blacksmith was demanding and fraught with danger. Physical, social, and moral challenges tested the endurance, judgment, and competence of practitioners in each vocation. Success required mastery of technical skills, ethical conduct, and community relationships, balancing labor, knowledge, and reputation. Their ability to navigate these pressures shaped both personal survival and the welfare of the communities they served, reinforcing the vital role of each vocation in medieval society. In medieval Europe, the mastery of any vocation, whether as a monk, healer, or blacksmith, depended on structured training and the careful transmission of knowledge from experienced practitioners to novices. Apprenticeship and mentorship were essential for maintaining skill, preserving tradition, and ensuring the survival of both practical and spiritual practices across generations. These relationships were formal, socially recognized, and often lifelong, shaping not only competence but character, reputation, and social standing. For monks, education began with novitiate training. Young men entering a monastery underwent a period of observation and instruction, learning the rules, rituals, and responsibilities of monastic life. Novices were guided by senior monks, absorbing not only liturgical practices, but also moral, spiritual, and practical knowledge. Instruction covered reading and writing, Latin literacy, scriptural study, and often music, herbal medicine, or agricultural techniques. The mentor-novice relationship emphasized obedience, humility, and spiritual discernment, ensuring that the new monk could integrate fully into communal life while developing personal discipline and understanding. Healers often relied on apprenticeship in the more practical sense. Knowledge of herbs, remedies, and treatment techniques was transmitted through close observation, hands-on practice, and verbal instruction. A young apprentice might begin by preparing simple remedies, observing patient care, and gradually performing more complex procedures under supervision. Folk healers, particularly women, often passed knowledge through family lines or community mentorship, blending experience with tradition. In more formal settings, medical texts were studied under a master physician, providing theoretical foundations in humoral theory, anatomy, and pharmacology. Apprenticeship balanced empirical learning with the cultivation of ethical practice and patient trust. Blacksmiths also depended on apprenticeships for skill transmission. A young apprentice would live with the master blacksmith, learning not only the craft but the discipline, work ethic, and social skills necessary for success. Training involved repetitive practice, incremental challenges, and careful observation. Apprentices learned to manage fire, hammer, and tools, progressing from minor tasks to fully crafting complex items. Guilds formalized this process, regulating the length of training, standards of skill, and progression from apprentice to journeyman and, ultimately, to master. Through this structured mentorship, technical knowledge, trade secrets, and ethical codes were preserved and passed to new generations. Mentorship went beyond technical instruction. Monks were trained to balance contemplation with labor, ethical responsibility with communal obligations, and scholarship with service. Healers learned not only remedies, but judgment, compassion, and the integration of spiritual care. Blacksmiths were guided in problem-solving, innovation, and social negotiation. In each vocation, the mentor modeled behavior, demonstrating how personal conduct, reputation, and skill were inseparable in sustaining both individual success and community trust. The social structure of apprenticeship also created bonds of loyalty and obligation. Apprentices were often treated as part of the household, contributing to domestic and professional tasks while learning. They, in turn, owed obedience, respect, and diligence to their mentors. Successful apprenticeships ensured continuity of practice, preservation of craft or spiritual tradition, and stability within the community. Masters gained reputation and labor support, while apprentices gained skill, social capital, and sometimes eventual independence or inheritance of the workshop, forge, or responsibility within a monastery. Documentation and textual transmission were particularly significant in monasteries and formal medical training. Monks copied manuscripts, creating a repository of knowledge accessible to future generations. Healers studied medical texts, recorded observations, and sometimes contributed their own remedies and treatments to the communal body of knowledge. Blacksmiths' innovations were transmitted through demonstration, apprenticeship, and occasionally written manuals, ensuring that techniques survived and evolved. Mentorship also fostered moral and social education. Monks instilled values of obedience, piety, and communal service. Healers emphasized ethical care, discretion, and social responsibility in treating patients. Blacksmiths imparted honesty, reliability, and the importance of meeting community needs. These lessons shaped not only skill but character, reinforcing the ethical and social dimensions of each vocation. Challenges in transmission arose from limited resources, geographic isolation, or societal disruptions, such as war, famine, or disease. Yet despite these obstacles, structured mentorship ensured that knowledge persisted, adapted, and even flourished across centuries. The continuity of skill and wisdom was a cornerstone of medieval resilience, enabling communities to maintain spiritual life, health, and economic stability. In conclusion, apprenticeship and mentorship were foundational to the medieval vocations of monk, healer, and blacksmith. Through careful guidance, observation, and practice, knowledge, technical, spiritual, and ethical, was transmitted across generations. These relationships shaped skill, character, and social influence, ensuring both individual competence and community stability. The medieval emphasis on structured training demonstrates that expertise was inseparable from moral conduct, social bonds, and the transmission of tradition, sustaining the lifeblood of society through the work of dedicated mentors and diligent apprentices. The work of monks, healers, and blacksmiths was inseparable from the tools, instruments, and equipment that enabled their daily labor. In medieval Europe, access to specialized tools defined the scope, efficiency, and quality of work. These implements were carefully crafted, maintained, and often considered extensions of the practitioner's skill and identity. Understanding the tools of each vocation reveals not only technical practices but also the interplay between material culture, expertise, and social expectation. Monks relied on a variety of instruments to fulfill their spiritual, intellectual, and practical duties. In the scriptorium, quills, ink, and parchment were essential for copying manuscripts. The quality of quill preparation, ink formulation, and careful ruling of lines determined the legibility and durability of texts. The illuminators required fine brushes, natural pigments, and sometimes gold leaf to decorate initials, borders, and illustrations, turning manuscripts into both religious artifacts and works of art. Monks also depended on bells to mark canonical hours, chalices, and altar vessels for liturgical rituals, and agricultural tools for tending gardens or orchards, reflecting the integration of spiritual and material labor. Healers' instruments varied according to their specialization and the resources available. Herbalists relied on mortars, and pestles for grinding plants, vessels for storing tinctures, and knives or scalpels for preparing remedies. Midwives and surgical healers used specialized tools, such as forceps, probes, and needles, often crafted locally by blacksmiths. The careful maintenance and cleanliness of instruments were vital, given the risks of infection and injury. Additionally, healers often carried reference materials, manuscripts, herbal compendiums, or notes on treatments, linking practical skill with textual knowledge and enabling adaptation to complex or unusual cases. Blacksmiths' tools formed the backbone of their labor-intensive craft. Hammers of varying weights, tongs for gripping hot metal, anvils for shaping, and bellows to control the forge's heat were indispensable. Each tool served a specific function, requiring mastery to manipulate fire, metal, and force effectively. Specialized chisels, punches, and molds allowed blacksmiths to create precise decorative work or complex fittings. Water-driven hammers or mechanical forges, though rare, were employed in larger workshops, increasing productivity. The blacksmith's toolkit also reflected experience, personal modifications, custom-made implements, and inherited tools carried practical wisdom and tradition across generations. The maintenance of tools was a continuous task. Monks had to preserve quills, sharpen knives, and ensure that manuscripts were stored safely. Healers sterilized and repaired instruments as best as they could with available resources, while blacksmiths constantly reshaped, tempered, and maintained their equipment. Neglect could compromise the quality of work, endanger users, and damage reputation. Therefore, meticulous care of tools was considered both a practical necessity and a reflection of professionalism. Tools also influenced workflow and the structure of the workday. Monks' scriptorium or workshop schedules depended on lighting conditions, availability of materials, and collective routines. Healers needed to prepare instruments and remedies in advance to respond quickly to urgent cases. Blacksmiths regulated their labor according to the temperature of the forge, the hardness of metal, and the complexity of commissions. In each case, tools mediated between skill and outcome, enabling practitioners to translate knowledge into tangible results. Access to specialized equipment also reflected social and economic conditions. Wealthier monasteries could afford high-quality pigments, gold leaf, or rare inks, while respected healers might acquire surgical instruments from distant cities. Established blacksmiths could invest in larger, more sophisticated forges. In contrast, practitioners in poorer villages relied on local materials, improvisation, and ingenuity to achieve results, often creating innovative solutions with limited resources. Resourcefulness became a mark of skill and adaptability, demonstrating how tools and materials were inseparable from both craft and social position. The symbolic and ritual significance of tools cannot be overlooked. Monastic instruments were associated with sacred labor and spiritual discipline. A quill or book could be considered holy by extension of its use. Healers' instruments, particularly those used in childbirth or exorcism, carried moral and spiritual weight. Blacksmith hammers and anvils were sometimes seen as emblematic of creative and transformative power, linking human skill to divine or cosmic order. Tools thus conveyed authority, expertise, and cultural meaning beyond their practical function. In conclusion, the daily work of monks, healers, and blacksmiths was profoundly shaped by the tools and equipment at their disposal. Instruments enabled technical skill, structured labor, and facilitated mastery of complex tasks, while also reflecting social status, resource availability, and cultural significance. Maintaining, mastering, and adapting tools was an essential aspect of professional identity, bridging knowledge, craft, and spiritual or ethical responsibility. The relationship between practitioner and instrument exemplifies the material intelligence of medieval vocations, demonstrating how human skill and physical implements work together to sustain community life. The lives of monks, healers, and blacksmiths were deeply influenced by the seasons, the natural environment, and the rhythms of agricultural and social life. In medieval Europe, the passage of the year dictated what tasks could be performed, when resources were available, and how communities structured their routines. Work was not only shaped by human skill and social obligation, but also by sunlight, weather, temperature, and the availability of raw materials. Understanding these environmental constraints is crucial to appreciating the daily life of medieval practitioners. For monks, the canonical hours structured the day, but the seasons shaped the pace and focus of their labor. In the winter months, with shorter daylight hours, monks devoted more time to indoor work such as manuscript copying, study, and crafting. The scriptorium became a hub of activity, with candles or natural light from windows providing illumination for hours of meticulous work. Conversely, spring and summer offered longer days and warmer weather, allowing monks to spend more time tending gardens, cultivating orchards, and maintaining monastery grounds. Seasonal agricultural tasks were integral to sustaining the monastery and its surrounding communities, reflecting the interdependence of spiritual and material labor. Healers' routines were also influenced by seasonal rhythms. Many medicinal plants were only available at specific times of the year, requiring careful planning for harvest preparation and storage. Spring and summer provided opportunities to gather herbs, roots, and flowers, while winter necessitated reliance on preserved remedies and dried materials. Seasonal illnesses such as fevers, dysentery, or respiratory infections often peaked in particular months, requiring healers to anticipate demand and adjust their workload accordingly. Environmental factors, including water quality, food availability, and temperature fluctuations, influenced both the prevalence of disease and the effectiveness of treatments, making seasonal awareness a critical component of a healer's practice. Blacksmiths faced their own environmental constraints, particularly due to the physical demands of working with fire and metal. In cold weather, the forge was both a source of warmth and a practical challenge, as maintaining a consistent temperature for metalworking required additional fuel and careful management. In contrast, the heat of summer could make prolonged work exhausting, demanding careful pacing and hydration. Seasonal cycles also influenced demand for blacksmith services. Spring and summer saw increased production of agricultural tools, while autumn required repair and preparation for harvest. During times of conflict, blacksmiths might also be called upon to produce weapons, armor, and horseshoes, adding urgency and intensity to their labor. Daily schedules were adapted to both environmental conditions and social needs. Monks divided their day among prayer, labor, and study, carefully balancing indoor and outdoor tasks according to weather and daylight. Healers needed to remain flexible, responding to emergencies and adjusting routines to accommodate patients' needs and environmental constraints. Blacksmiths coordinated work with market days, agricultural cycles, and community events, ensuring timely delivery of essential tools and equipment. These adaptations reflect the interplay between human planning and natural forces in structuring medieval work life. Environmental challenges extended beyond routine scheduling. Floods, droughts, and harsh winters could disrupt supply chains, limit access to raw materials, or affect the health of communities. Epidemics were influenced by climate, sanitation, and seasonal migrations, increasing the burden on healers and challenging communal resilience. Monks, healers, and blacksmiths alike needed to be resourceful, improvising solutions, storing supplies, and collaborating to mitigate the effects of environmental unpredictability. The seasons also shaped social and religious life. Feast days, holy observances, and festivals often coincided with agricultural cycles, influencing workload and communal participation. Monks played key roles in organizing religious celebrations, which required preparation, decoration, and coordination. Healers might be called to assist with large gatherings, treating injuries or illness arising from communal events. Blacksmiths prepared for festivals by crafting ceremonial items, maintaining public infrastructure, and ensuring that essential tools and equipment were in working order. In all three vocations, environmental constraints and seasonal rhythms reinforced the importance of planning, observation, and adaptation. Success depended not only on technical skill and knowledge, but also on awareness of natural cycles, resource availability, and communal needs. The ability to anticipate challenges, adjust schedules, and harmonize labor with the surrounding environment was essential for sustaining both personal practice and the broader welfare of medieval communities. In conclusion, the work of monks, healers, and blacksmiths was inseparable from the natural world. Seasonal rhythms dictated daily schedules, influenced the availability of materials, and shaped the intensity and focus of labor. Environmental constraints required adaptability, resourcefulness, and foresight, linking practical skill with an intimate understanding of nature. By integrating human effort with the cycles of the year, these medieval practitioners ensured the continuity of their work, the resilience of their communities, and the survival of traditions that shaped daily life across generations. In medieval Europe, work was rarely viewed as purely functional. It carried deep spiritual and symbolic significance. Monks, healers, and blacksmiths all engaged in rituals, practices, and symbolic acts that imbued their labor with meaning beyond the material or practical outcomes. These practices shaped identity, reinforced social cohesion, and connected daily labor to moral, religious, and cosmological frameworks. For monks, ritual was inseparable from daily life. Prayer, chanting, and meditation structured their day, infusing every action with spiritual purpose. The canonical hours, matins, lauds, sext, vespers, and compline organized time not merely for practical efficiency, but for sanctification. Manual labor, whether in gardens, kitchens, or workshops, was also a form of devotion. The rule of Saint Benedict emphasized ora et labora, pray and work, encouraging monks to see every task as an offering to God. Even repetitive tasks like copying manuscripts or scrubbing floors were imbued with spiritual significance, symbolizing discipline, humility, and devotion. Monks often blessed tools, ink, or gardens before use, acknowledging divine providence in their work and reinforcing the moral and spiritual weight of daily labor. Healers similarly integrated ritual and symbolic practice into their work. Many treatments combined physical remedies with prayers, blessings, or incantations. In medieval belief, illness could stem from both physical and spiritual causes, so the healer's role encompassed tending the body and the soul. Herbal remedies were sometimes prepared at specific times of day or year to align with astrological or religious cycles, reflecting a cosmological understanding of health. Midwives, in particular, often invoke protective prayers or charms during childbirth, blending medical care with spiritual safeguarding. Ritual practices enhanced trust in the healer's abilities, reinforced moral authority, and created a sense of order amidst the uncertainty of sickness and injury. Blacksmiths, too, engaged in symbolic acts connected to their craft. The forge was often seen as a liminal space of transformation, where raw materials were converted into tools, weapons, or ornaments. The act of striking heated metal rhythmically on the anvil was not only technical but symbolic, representing mastery over nature and the transformation of potential into utility. Blacksmiths sometimes performed blessings or protective rituals on weapons and armor, acknowledging the spiritual dimension of tools used for defense, hunting, or ritual display. In some regions, the forge itself held cultural significance, symbolizing creativity, power, and community protection. Religious and seasonal festivals intertwined with labor and ritual. Monks led and participated in celebrations, processions, and feasts, marking important liturgical dates. Healers might adjust their practices according to holy days, using blessings or sacred herbs to complement remedies. Blacksmiths prepared ceremonial objects, repaired instruments for festivals, and participated in community rituals where their craft symbolized prosperity, protection, and skill. These intersections of labor, ritual, and social life reinforced the sacred and practical significance of work in medieval society. The symbolic aspects of work also reinforced ethical and moral dimensions. Monks cultivated patience, obedience, and humility, learning to see all labor as service to God and community. Healers emphasized compassion, diligence, and prudence, recognizing that mistakes could have profound consequences. Blacksmiths balanced strength with precision, innovation with responsibility, reflecting societal expectations of reliability and moral integrity. In each vocation, the symbolic meaning of labor shaped professional identity and social perception, linking skill with character. Tools themselves often carried symbolic weight. Monks' quills and books represented knowledge, devotion, and divine inspiration. Healers' mortars, pestles, and vessels symbolized care, preservation, and transformation. Blacksmiths' hammers, tongs, and anvils embodied strength, skill, and creative mastery. The act of using these tools transformed raw materials into objects of practical, moral, or spiritual value, creating a profound connection between human effort, intention, and outcome. In addition to ritual and symbolism, these practices reinforced continuity and tradition. Monks' chants preserved liturgical patterns, and music, healers' remedies transmitted centuries of accumulated knowledge. Blacksmiths' techniques evolved but maintained core principles. Ritualized work, blessings, and symbolic acts ensured that skill, ethical practice, and cultural meaning were passed from generation to generation, embedding vocation within both community and history. In conclusion, the work of monks, healers, and blacksmiths in medieval Europe was suffused with ritual, spirituality, and symbolism. Beyond technical skill, their labor carried moral, ethical, and cultural significance, connecting daily tasks to divine purpose, social responsibility, and communal identity. Whether through prayer, blessing, or symbolic craftsmanship, practitioners imbued their work with meaning that extended far beyond the material, shaping their own identities, reinforcing societal norms, and linking human effort to a larger cosmological and moral order. Medieval vocations, while often structured around male-dominated institutions, were deeply influenced by gender roles, family networks, and the participation of women. Monks, healers, and blacksmiths each operated within social frameworks that defined expectations for men and women, yet women contributed significantly to these vocations, shaping daily work, preserving knowledge, and ensuring the survival and well-being of communities. Understanding gender dynamics illuminates the complexity of labor, authority, and skill in medieval society. In monastic life, gender segregation was strict. Men and women rarely shared religious communities. Monks lived in male-only monasteries, while nuns occupied convents governed by similar rules of obedience, prayer, and labor. Nevertheless, women's influence extended beyond convent walls. Female patrons provided endowments, land, or donations that sustained monasteries, giving women indirect authority over spiritual and economic life. Some women were involved in managing local estates, cultivating gardens, and producing goods that supplied monasteries with food, textiles, and medicinal herbs. In these ways, women contributed materially to monastic stability. Even if they were not present within the cloister itself, healers relied heavily on women's expertise, particularly in the realms of midwifery, herbal medicine, and domestic care. Women's knowledge of childbirth, childcare, and household remedies was passed down through generations, forming a core part of the community's medical knowledge. Midwives played a central role in ensuring the health of mothers and infants, while herbalists prepared remedies for everyday ailments, menstrual care, and chronic conditions. In many villages, Women healers were the primary healthcare providers, trusted for their skill, experience, and moral integrity. Male healers sometimes supplemented or formalized this knowledge, especially in surgical or theoretical treatments, but female practitioners often formed the backbone of practical medicine. Family networks were crucial for the transmission of medical knowledge. Skills, recipes, and practical techniques were taught informally within households, creating intergenerational continuity. Daughters learned from mothers, sisters, or aunts, acquiring skills in identifying herbs, preparing remedies, and caring for the sick. Boys might learn alongside girls or from male relatives, ensuring that both genders contributed to and benefited from the pool of practical medical knowledge. In this way, healthcare was not solely professionalized but embedded within familial and community structures, blending gendered expertise with social responsibility. Blacksmithing was traditionally dominated by men, particularly in formal workshops or guilds, yet women's involvement was significant, especially in family-based enterprises. Wives and daughters often assisted in preparatory work such as transporting fuel, handling materials, or finishing products. They also managed accounts, interacted with clients, and oversaw apprentices, contributing essential administrative and organizational support. In some cases, widows inherited blacksmith workshops, continuing production, and preserving family skill lines. These contributions, though sometimes invisible in official records, were indispensable to the sustainability of blacksmithing as both a craft and a livelihood. Gender roles also shaped social authority and access to training. Monks and male blacksmiths were formally recognized by religious or guild institutions, granting them official legitimacy. Women, in contrast, operated primarily within informal, community-based structures. Despite the lack of formal recognition, female healers and midwives commanded respect and influence through skill, reliability, and moral reputation. Their authority derived from demonstrated competence and community trust rather than institutional endorsement, highlighting alternative forms of social power in medieval life. Collaboration between genders further strengthened community resilience. Male and female healers often worked together, combining surgical knowledge, herbal expertise, and spiritual care. Families collaborated in agricultural labor, food production, and craft work, ensuring that both men's and women's contributions were coordinated and mutually supportive. Monastic institutions benefited from women's material support. Midwives protected families and villages, and blacksmith families maintained workshops that supplied essential tools for agriculture, defense, and domestic life. This interconnectedness underscores the interdependence of gender roles in sustaining medieval society. Seasonal and religious cycles also influenced women's participation. Women's domestic and healthcare labor increased during planting and harvest seasons, festivals, and times of disease or crisis. Their efforts complemented the work of monks and blacksmiths, creating a rhythm of shared labor that ensured both practical survival and spiritual observance. Women's skill, labor, and knowledge were thus not peripheral but integral to the functioning of communities. In conclusion, gender roles, family involvement, and women's participation were central to the vocations of monks, healers, and blacksmiths. While men dominated formal religious and craft institutions, women contributed essential expertise, labor, and organizational support, particularly in healthcare, midwifery, domestic production, and family workshops. Their participation ensured the continuity of knowledge, the survival of communities, and the integration of practical, spiritual, and social labor. Understanding these dynamics highlights the collaborative and interdependent nature of medieval life, where skill, gender, and family networks combine to sustain the daily rhythm and long-term resilience of society. Education and literacy were crucial components of medieval vocational life, though they varied greatly among monks, healers, and blacksmiths. The ability to read, write, and maintain records influenced not only the efficiency and accuracy of work but also the transmission of knowledge, the preservation of tradition, and social authority. Record-keeping, in particular, allowed communities to maintain continuity, track resources, and ensure accountability, embedding literacy within practical, spiritual, and economic life. Monks were often the most literate members of medieval society. Their education began in the novitiate and was reinforced through daily engagement with sacred texts, study of Latin, and instruction in writing and copying manuscripts. Monks meticulously maintained records of monastery property, donations, and economic transactions, providing essential administrative oversight. Chronicle writing was another critical aspect of monastic literacy. Monks recorded historical events, natural phenomena, local happenings, and the lives of saints, creating a rich historical archive that preserved communal memory. Even agricultural activities, such as planting, harvesting, and management of monastery lands, were carefully documented, linking literacy with practical and economic governance. Healers relied on both oral and written methods to preserve and transmit knowledge. In formal settings, male physicians studied Latin medical texts derived from Galen, Hippocrates, and Arabic scholars like Avicenna. They maintained notebooks or casebooks, recording symptoms, remedies, and patient responses. These records allowed healers to refine treatments, track the efficacy of herbal remedies, and pass practical knowledge to apprentices. Women healers, especially midwives and herbalists, primarily relied on oral transmission within families and communities, supplemented by written compendiums when available. Even in oral traditions, mnemonic techniques, songs, and ritualized procedures ensured accurate recall of complex medical knowledge across generations. Record-keeping for blacksmiths focused on practical and economic concerns. Workshop logs might document the quantity of metal available, commissions completed, and apprentices' progress. Guilds required meticulous tracking of apprenticeships, membership dues, and production standards, ensuring quality and fairness within the craft. Blacksmiths also used sketches or models to plan complex items, such as weapons, armor, or decorative fittings, linking visual literacy with technical skill. These practices ensured consistency, allowed for the replication of complex designs, and reinforced accountability to clients, guilds, and communities. The integration of literacy with daily work was not purely functional. It also conferred authority. Monks' ability to read, interpret, and write sacred and legal texts legitimized their spiritual and administrative authority. Healers' use of texts and careful records distinguished them from untrained practitioners, enhancing credibility and facilitating the transmission of knowledge. Blacksmiths' documentation of guild standards, apprenticeships, and commissions established professional legitimacy and social trust. Literacy, therefore, became a marker of expertise, bridging practical skill with social influence. Education also fostered innovation and adaptation. Monks preserved and transmitted scientific, agricultural, and medicinal knowledge alongside spiritual instruction. Healers experimented with remedies, modifying techniques based on observation and textual consultation. Blacksmiths refined metalworking techniques, developed new tools, and improved durability and efficiency. Record-keeping allowed these innovations to be shared, evaluated, and passed to future generations, ensuring that progress was cumulative rather than ephemeral. Environmental and social contexts influenced access to education and literacy. Monks in well-endowed monasteries had abundant resources for study and writing, while those in smaller or remote abbeys faced limitations. Healers in cities or associated with universities could access medical texts, while rural healers relied on oral traditions and local materials. Blacksmiths' literacy often depended on guild structures and family instruction, with visual or practical recording supplementing formal writing. Despite these variations, record-keeping and education played central roles in shaping competence, reputation, and community integration across all three vocations. In addition to practical purposes, literacy and record-keeping reinforced ethical and social responsibility. Monks documented donations, obligations, and moral teachings, ensuring accountability. Hearers' casebooks safeguarded patient information, recorded remedies ethically, and supported evidence-based practice. Blacksmiths' logs and guild records maintained fair labor practices, quality standards, and trading continuity. These practices linked literacy with moral, social, and economic integrity, emphasizing that knowledge was inseparable from ethical responsibility. In conclusion, education, literacy, and record-keeping were essential to the lives of monks, healers, and blacksmiths. Through reading, writing, and documentation, practitioners preserved knowledge, ensured accountability, facilitated innovation, and reinforced authority. Literacy bridged practical skill with social and moral influence, allowing communities to benefit from accumulated expertise. In medieval society, the ability to record, transmit, and interpret knowledge was as critical as physical skill or spiritual devotion, forming the foundation of continuity, competence, and cultural resilience. The livelihoods of monks, healers, and blacksmiths were closely tied to the economic structures of medieval communities. Each vocation contributed to the local economy in unique ways, and their income, resource management, and economic influence were intertwined with social obligations, trade networks, and communal interdependence. Understanding the economic aspects of these roles reveals how skill, labor, and resource stewardship sustained both individual practitioners and the broader community. Monks were economic actors as well as spiritual leaders. Monasteries often owned extensive lands, generating income through agriculture, rents, tithes, and donations. Monks managed crops, orchards, livestock, mills, and fisheries, applying practical knowledge to ensure productivity. Surplus produce could be sold or traded, providing financial stability and resources for charitable activities. Some monasteries specialized in crafts or production, including brewing, weaving, and manuscript copying, further integrating economic activity with monastic life. Resource management was meticulous. Monks monitored crop rotation, preserved food for winter months, and allocated labor efficiently, reflecting a blend of spiritual discipline and practical stewardship. Here's economic role was more individualized but equally vital. Payment for services varied widely, ranging from coin to barter with food, goods, or labor. Wealthier clients might offer significant remuneration, while rural villagers often paid in kind or through reciprocal labor. Healers balanced the need to earn a living with social responsibility, ensuring that care was provided even to those unable to pay fully. Resource management included cultivating or foraging medicinal herbs, maintaining supplies of tools and remedies, and storing materials for seasonal use. Strategic allocation of resources allowed healers to maintain readiness, meet demand, and preserve their reputation within the community. Blacksmiths occupied a central position in the local economy, providing tools, weapons, and hardware essential for agriculture, construction, and defense. Income came from direct sales to farmers, tradesmen, nobles, and occasionally the crown or local authorities. Blacksmiths managed their workshops carefully, balancing labor, material costs, and client needs. Metal, fuel, and water were key resources requiring efficient use. Scrap metal might be recycled, and the quality of raw materials had to be monitored to produce durable and effective products. Skilled blacksmiths could command higher fees, especially for specialized items such as armor, fine weaponry, or intricate decorative metalwork, reflecting the combination of craftsmanship and economic negotiation. Guilds played a crucial role in regulating blacksmiths' economic activity. They set standards for quality, controlled apprenticeships, and often fixed prices or rates for services. Guild membership offered protection, access to collective resources, and social networking, enhancing economic stability. Monks and healers, while not always formal guild members, benefited from analogous systems. Monasteries pooled resources, and networks of healers shared knowledge, materials, and labor, ensuring resilience against scarcity or crisis. Economic pressures were omnipresent. Poor harvests, political instability, or epidemics could disrupt income and challenge resource management. Monks had to ration provisions and adapt agricultural strategies. Healers might face shortages of herbs or materials. Blacksmiths could experience scarcity of metal or fuel. Creative solutions such as local sourcing, collaboration, or temporary suspension of non-essential production were essential for survival. Economic resilience depended on foresight, careful planning, and the ability to align labor with seasonal and community demands. Beyond income, the economic role of these practitioners reinforced social obligations. Monks provided charity, hospitality, and spiritual services, redistributing resources to the poor and travelers. Healers contributed to communal health, reducing mortality and ensuring labor capacity. Blacksmiths supplied the material foundation for agriculture, trade, and defense, supporting both productivity and social stability. Their economic activity was therefore inseparable from community welfare, demonstrating the moral dimension of wealth and labor in medieval society. Trade and exchange networks extended the influence of these professions. Monks often participated in regional trade to acquire rare materials, manuscripts, or relics. Healers sometimes obtained imported herbs or texts from distant centers of learning, enriching local practice. Blacksmiths could source specialized metal or tools from regional markets, allowing for more sophisticated craftsmanship. These interactions connected local labor with broader economic systems, integrating skill, commerce, and social networks. In conclusion, the economic roles of monks, healers, and blacksmiths were multifaceted, combining income generation, resource management, and community service. Monks managed monastery lands and craft production. Healers balanced patient care with material provisioning, and blacksmiths transformed raw materials into indispensable tools and weapons. Effective management of resources and labor ensured both personal livelihood and communal resilience. Economic activity was inseparable from social, moral, and technical responsibilities, demonstrating that medieval vocational life blended practical skill, ethical stewardship, and strategic management to sustain society. Conflict and competition were inevitable in the tightly woven fabric of medieval life. Whether born of resource scarcity, social hierarchy, or ideological divergence, disputes among monks, healers, and blacksmiths shaped their daily experiences and influenced their reputations. Each group operated within a distinct social role, but their functions frequently overlapped, leading to friction over authority, ethics, and economic power. Understanding these conflicts offers insight into how medieval communities balanced cooperation and rivalry while preserving stability and continuity. Among monks, internal conflict often arose from the tension between spiritual ideals and material responsibilities. Monasteries were not immune to disputes over property, hierarchy, or discipline. Senior monks might clash over the management of lands, interpretation of rules, or division of labor. The Benedictine rule emphasized humility and obedience, yet human nature occasionally defied these virtues. Rivalries between abbés, particularly when competing for royal favor or donations, could escalate into prolonged disputes. These conflicts were documented in monastic chronicles, which not only recorded spiritual triumphs, but also acknowledged the imperfections of communal life. The Church frequently intervened, sending inspectors or reformers to restore discipline and reassert spiritual focus. Healers faced competition from multiple fronts: clerical physicians, lay practitioners, and herbalists, each claiming authority over the art of healing. Monastic infirmaries often provided free medical care, which could undermine the livelihood of independent healers. Conversely, lay healers sometimes accused monks of hoarding knowledge or using church influence to dominate the field. Disputes also emerged between academically trained physicians and traditional herbalists. The former, educated in universities and versed in Latin texts, dismissed empirical or folk practices as superstitious. Yet rural communities often trusted local women healers or wise men, whose remedies were grounded in lived experience. These social and professional tensions reflected a broader clash between scholarly authority and experiential knowledge, each side defending its legitimacy through both practice and rhetoric. Blacksmiths, for their part, experienced conflicts over guild membership pricing and territorial rights. Guilds imposed strict regulations to maintain quality and prevent undercutting, but independent blacksmiths sometimes resisted these constraints. Disputes could arise over the right to operate in a certain district, especially in towns with limited metal supply or clientele. Apprentice mistreatment, accusations of secret techniques being stolen, and disagreements over payment were common. Feuds occasionally escalated into physical confrontations or legal complaints brought before local councils. Despite the ideal of unity within craft brotherhoods, competition for profit and recognition could easily disrupt harmony. Intervocational disputes were also significant. Monks, who managed productive estates and sometimes produced goods like wine, tools, or manuscripts, occasionally competed with local craftsmen or merchants. Lay people resented what they saw as unfair advantages. The church's tax exemptions and large-scale production could depress local markets. Healers and monks quarreled over the interpretation of illness and divine punishment. While monks framed disease within a moral or spiritual narrative, lay healers treated it as a physical condition requiring material remedies. This divergence in worldview sometimes produced tension, especially when patients turned to one group after failing to recover under another's care. Even within cooperation, competition persisted. Monks might employ blacksmiths for monastery construction or tool repair, but negotiate prices aggressively to protect monastic budgets. Blacksmiths relied on monks for steady contracts, but feared exploitation or late payment. Healers worked closely with monasteries when attending to sick brothers, yet disputes arose over methods or authority. Some healers accused monks of appropriating their remedies, while monks criticized lay practitioners for neglecting moral or spiritual dimensions of healing. Such frictions revealed deeper anxieties about power, legitimacy, and control over knowledge. Social hierarchy further complicated these relationships. Monks, aligned with the church, occupied a higher social status and wielded moral authority. Healers and blacksmiths, though respected for their utility, remained within the lay or artisan classes. This imbalance often shaped the outcomes of disputes. Monks could appeal to ecclesiastical courts, while craftsmen faced secular justice. Nonetheless, mutual dependence tempered open hostility. Monasteries needed the skill of blacksmiths and the remedies of healers, while lay practitioners valued monastic patronage and protection. At times, external crises magnified existing tensions. During epidemics, such as the Black Death, healers and monks faced blame for failure to prevent or cure illness. Rumors of malpractice or divine punishment fueled distrust. Economic strain heightened resentment toward monasteries seen as hoarding wealth. In contrast, wars or famines increased reliance on blacksmiths for tools and weapons, granting them temporary leverage in negotiations. These cyclical shifts in demand altered power dynamics, emphasizing the fluid nature of status and influence among medieval vocations. Despite conflict, resolution mechanisms existed. Mediation by local lords, guild councils, or ecclesiastical courts sought to restore balance. Monastic reform movements encouraged humility and cooperation. Guild charters codified fair competition, and healers' networks fostered mutual aid. Over time, experience taught practitioners that coexistence, though imperfect, was essential. Their shared dependence on community trust and interlinked economies ensured that rivalry rarely escalated beyond reconciliation. In conclusion, the lives of monks, healers, and blacksmiths were marked by both collaboration and conflict. Disputes over resources, authority, and recognition reflected broader tensions between sacred and secular spheres, intellectual and practical knowledge, and communal and individual priorities. Yet through negotiation, adaptation, and institutional mediation, these groups maintained a delicate equilibrium. Conflict, paradoxically, became a catalyst for refinement, forcing each vocation to define its purpose, defend its integrity, and contribute to the evolving fabric of medieval society. The daily life of monks, healers, and blacksmiths unfolded according to structured rhythms of work, rest, and spiritual observance. These patterns not only organized time but also reflected deeper values: discipline, devotion, and diligence. In medieval society, the way a person structured their day was an expression of purpose and belonging. Each vocation followed distinct cycles governed by the seasons, religious calendars, and the immediate demands of their craft or calling. For monks, time was sacred. Their day was measured not by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the ringing of bells announcing the canonical hours of prayer. From the moment they awoke before dawn for matins and lauds, their lives followed a carefully prescribed rhythm blending labor, study, and worship. The daily schedule, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, divided the day into equal parts of devotion and duty. Each prayer service punctuated the workday, reminding monks that every act, whether sweeping a corridor or tending a garden, was an offering to God. Between these services, monks engaged in manual labor and intellectual tasks. In the scriptorium, scribes copied sacred texts. In the fields, laborers harvested crops or cared for animals. The balance of prayer and labor formed the core of monastic philosophy. Meals were eaten in silence, accompanied by readings from Scripture. Rest was minimal but sufficient, regulated by the rhythm of the bell. Even sleep was spiritualized, a period of restoration in preparation for renewed service. This measured existence fostered a profound sense of order and purpose. Healers, by contrast, lived by the unpredictable rhythm of need. Their workday was fluid, dictated by illness, injury, and the changing seasons. A healer might rise at dawn to prepare infusions or poultices, consult patients mid-morning, and travel between households or villages throughout the day. Emergencies, births, fevers, or wounds could summon them at any hour. While their days lacked the regimented structure of monastic life, they adhered to routines that maintained readiness, checking supplies, drying herbs, cleaning instruments, and tending their gardens or storage. Rest for healers was scarce. Long hours of travel, emotional strain from dealing with suffering, and exposure to contagion took a toll. Yet moments of quiet reflection, prayer, or meditation provided solace. Many healers incorporated spirituality into their practice, beginning and ending their day with short prayers for protection and guidance. The rhythm of their lives echoed the heartbeat of the community, erratic and predictable, yet sustained by a deep sense of purpose and compassion. Blacksmiths worked according to the rhythms of daylight and fire. The forge defined their day, from dawn, when the first coals were lit, to dusk, when the fires cooled. The sound of hammer on anvil marked the hours, creating a steady rhythm of labor. Mornings were often devoted to preparation, heating the furnace, shaping raw metal, and organizing tools. Midday brought the heaviest work, as the heat of the forge and the demands of customers reached their peak. Afternoons were spent refining pieces, repairing tools, or teaching apprentices. The physical intensity of blacksmithing required stamina and coordination. Rest periods were brief, often taken near the forge, drinking water and wiping away soot. Yet these small pauses carried communal meaning. Journeymen and apprentices gathered, sharing stories, discussing technique, or exchanging local news. Work and fellowship blended seamlessly, reinforcing the craft's social cohesion. Religion was not absent from the blacksmith's day. Before beginning work, many would cross themselves or mutter a prayer to St. Eligius, patron of metalworkers. The sound of church bells reminded them of the sacred hours, and some paused briefly for prayer, particularly on feast days. While their labor might seem secular, it was infused with a sense of spiritual duty to craft tools that served others and honored God through honest work. Seasonality further shaped these rhythms. For monks, longer daylight hours in summer allowed for extended agricultural labor, while winter emphasized study and indoor tasks. Healers adapted to the seasons of disease. Spring and autumn brought fevers and fluxes, while winter demanded treatments for respiratory illness. Blacksmiths followed agricultural cycles, forging plows before planting, shoeing horses during travel seasons, and repairing tools after harvest. The calendar of saints and festivals intertwined with these cycles, turning labor into a sacred rhythm synchronized with nature and divine time. Even rest carried vocational meaning. For monks, rest symbolized obedience and renewal, not indulgence. For healers, it was recovery from emotional and physical exhaustion. For blacksmiths, it was both necessity and ritual. The closing of the forge fire signified the day's completion, a brief peace before the next cycle began. The Sabbath and feast days provided moments of communal rest and reflection, binding these different vocations to a shared cultural rhythm of worship and repose. Despite their differences, all three professions shared one unifying principle: work as devotion. Whether chanting psalms, grinding herbs, or shaping iron, each act was imbued with intention and reverence. Time was not merely something to be spent, it was to be sanctified through purpose. The rhythm of medieval life was therefore not a matter of mere routine but a form of living liturgy, where every motion, every breath, contributed to the order and meaning of the cosmos. In conclusion, the daily rhythms of monks, healers, and blacksmiths illustrate how time structured identity in the Middle Ages. Monks sanctified every hour through prayer and labor. Healers flowed with the pulse of human need. Blacksmiths shaped metal in harmony with the cycles of day and season. Work, rest, and worship formed the continuum, uniting body, spirit, and craft in a shared pursuit of meaning. In a world ruled by faith and necessity, rhythm was both discipline and comfort, the unseen architecture that bound individuals to their calling and to one another. In medieval society, monks, healers, and blacksmiths all shared a profound and direct relationship with the natural world. Nature was not an abstract concept, it was the source of sustenance, medicine, raw materials, and spiritual revelation. Each vocation drew meaning, materials, and wisdom from the environment, shaping their daily practices and worldview. For all three, nature was both a teacher and a partner, offering gifts that demanded respect, skill, and restraint. For monks, the natural world was an extension of divine creation. The monastery garden was a place of labor, contemplation, and instruction. Within its walls, herbs were cultivated for healing, vegetables for nourishment, and flowers for ornament and devotion. The careful arrangement of plants reflected not only agricultural knowledge, but also theological symbolism. The ordered garden represented the soul disciplined through faith. Monks saw gardening as a form of prayer. The tending of soil mirrored the cultivation of virtue. In the larger monastery estate, fields, vineyards, and orchards embodied the harmony between labor and divine providence. Monastic chronicles reveal a deep curiosity about natural phenomena. Monks recorded weather patterns, eclipses, floods, and harvests, interpreting them as both physical realities and signs of divine intention. Their agricultural calendars, rooted in observation, informed sowing and reaping, while their herbals documented the medicinal and spiritual properties of plants. Through this daily engagement, monks bridged theology and natural science, perceiving in the environment an intricate order designed by God. For healers, Nature was the foundation of their art. Every remedy began in the earth. Roots, leaves, minerals, and waters carried the essence of healing. A skilled healer knew where to find each plant, when to harvest it, and how to preserve its potency. Spring brought new herbs such as dandelion and plantain. Summer provided lavender and sage. Autumn yielded roots like valerian and mandrake. The rhythm of their work followed the seasons, and their survival depended on deep environmental awareness. Healers treated the natural world with reverence, often combining empirical observation with spiritual ritual. Before harvesting herbs, some whispered blessings or left offerings, acknowledging the sacred exchange between human need and natural generosity. The landscape itself became a living pharmacopoeia, text written in soil and leaf, read by those with trained eyes. In rivers, forests, and meadows, healers perceived a complex system of correspondences between plants, planets, and human temperaments, reflecting the medieval belief that the cosmos was unified through hidden sympathies. The blacksmith's relationship to nature was elemental. Fire, earth, air, and water, the four classical elements, converged at the forge. The raw materials of his craft were drawn directly from the earth: iron ore, coal, and stone. The process of transforming these materials was both physical and mystical, an act of creation through mastery of natural forces. To heat and shape metal required deep understanding of temperature, rhythm, and resistance. Each strike of the hammer echoed humanity's dialogue with matter itself. Blacksmiths respected the power of nature because they harnessed it daily. The heat of the forge could both create and destroy. Water could temper or shatter the blade. The craft demanded humility before the elements, a recognition that skill alone was not enough. They relied on instinct born from years of observation. The color of the metal in the fire told when it was ready. The hiss in the water revealed its temper. These subtle cues made the blacksmith part craftsman, part alchemist, bridging physical labor and natural philosophy. All three vocations practiced sustainable use of resources, guided by necessity and morality. Waste was rare in a world where every material had value. Monks recycled parchment, repurposed wood, and composted garden waste. Healers used every part of a plant, drying and storing herbs for lean seasons. Blacksmiths melted down broken tools or armor to forge new items. Stewardship was both economic prudence and moral duty, reflecting the belief that humanity was entrusted by God to care for creation. The natural world also influenced their spiritual imagination. Monks saw divine metaphors in rivers and trees, likening spiritual growth to the steady unfolding of leaves or the turning of seasons. Healers regarded nature as both remedy and mirror. Its balance reflected the health of the human body and soul. Blacksmiths saw transformation itself, the conversion of raw ore into refined metal, as symbolic of spiritual purification through labor and fire. Each, in their way, interpreted nature not as inert matter, but as sacred process. Environmental rhythms governed their collective lives. Floods, droughts, and storms affected harvests, supplies, and work schedules. A poor harvest meant less food for monasteries, fewer herbs for healers, and reduced trade for blacksmiths. Yet adversity also deepened their connection to the land. Prayers for rain, rituals of thanksgiving, and offerings for protection reflected an unbroken dialogue between humanity and the forces that sustained it. Their tools and practices embodied the intersection of nature and human ingenuity. The monk's quill, cut from a goose feather, traced divine words on animal skin parchment. The healer's mortar and pestle, carved from stone, ground the earth's medicines into powder. The blacksmith's anvil, forged from iron, rested on a wooden base cut from the forest. Each tool was itself a synthesis of natural materials, transformed by human hands into instruments of knowledge, healing, and creation. In conclusion, the lives of monks, healers, and blacksmiths were inseparable from the natural world. Their survival depended on its cycles. Their wisdom arose from its observation. Their spirituality was expressed through its symbols. For monks, Nature reflected divine order. For healers, it embodied life's restorative power. For blacksmiths, it revealed the transformative dance of matter and energy. In honoring, studying, and shaping nature, they sustained both themselves and their communities, living reminders that medieval life, though constrained by hardship, was rooted in profound ecological awareness and reverence. The medieval world was structured by hierarchy, both social and spiritual. Within the vocations of monk, healer, and blacksmith, authority and skill were transmitted through carefully maintained systems of rank, mentorship, and tradition. Gender roles further defined who could enter these professions, what responsibilities they held, and how their labor was valued. Yet within these constraints, individuals found ways to exercise agency, mastery, and creativity, ensuring that knowledge, whether sacred, medical, or technical, endured across generations. In monastic life, hierarchy was absolute. The structure of a monastery resembled both a spiritual family and a miniature kingdom. At the top stood the abbot or abbess, spiritual leader and administrator. Beneath them were the priors, who oversaw discipline and organization, sub-priors who managed daily routines, and the rank-and-file monks or nuns who performed the manual, clerical, and agricultural work sustaining the community. Each monk's progression through this hierarchy depended on obedience, learning, and moral conduct. The vow of humility required acceptance of rank as divine order. Senior monks mentored novices, teaching not only prayer and scripture but also practical skills such as gardening, brewing, or illumination. The process of apprenticeship in a monastery was lifelong. Even elders continued to learn through reading, contemplation, and correction. Education and discipline served as mirrors of the soul's refinement, each rank representing a deeper stage of understanding. Gender distinctions shaped monastic experience profoundly. While both men and women could become monastics, the opportunities and expectations differed. Male monasteries often held greater economic and political power, while female convents were more confined, but sometimes offered rare spaces for women's intellectual development. Abbesses of wealthy convents wielded authority comparable to male abbots, managing lands, funds, and correspondences with nobles. In such spaces, women could become spiritual leaders, healers, and educators, roles largely inaccessible in secular life. Among healers, gender played an especially complex role. Male physicians, trained in universities or under formal masters, dominated the higher echelons of medicine. They read Latin texts, received licenses, and treated wealthy clients. Yet the majority of medieval medical care was delivered by women midwives, herbalists, and wise women whose knowledge came through oral tradition and experience. Their skills in childbirth, herbal medicine, and wand care made them indispensable to everyday life. Even if official recognition was rare, the apprenticeship of a healer was often familial. Daughters learned from mothers, siblings shared remedies, and local apprentices observed masters during household visits. Knowledge was transmitted through demonstration and memory rather than writing. A young woman might spend years assisting an elder healer, learning to identify plants by smell, texture, and season. Over time, she would earn trust within the community, inheriting both reputation and responsibility. For male healers, apprenticeship followed a more institutional route. A student might apprentice under a licensed physician, learn anatomy from animal dissection, and study translations of classical medical texts. In cities, guild-like organizations began to regulate practitioners, demanding examination or proof of training. Yet even for educated physicians, practical apprenticeship, treating patients, observing symptoms, and preparing medicines was essential. The blend of academic and experiential learning reflected the dual nature of medieval medicine, intellectual theory and lived practice. Blacksmith's apprenticeship was among the most structured of all crafts. Boys typically began training around the age of 12, entering the workshop as apprentices under a master smith. The contract often lasted 7 years, during which the apprentice lived in the master's household, worked long hours, and learned every stage of metalwork from maintaining the fire and hammering raw iron to crafting nails, horseshoes, and eventually fine tools or weapons. Apprenticeship was both education and discipline, demanding physical endurance, precision, and respect for hierarchy. After years of practice, the apprentice advanced to journeyman status, allowed to work for wages but not yet to open his own forge. Journeymen traveled between towns, gaining experience and exposure to different techniques. Only after producing a masterpiece, a demonstration of superior skill, could one be accepted into the guild as a master craftsman. This hierarchical structure preserved quality, controlled competition, and ensured the continuity of tradition. The workshop thus functioned as both school and family, where discipline and mentorship shaped identity as much as craftsmanship. Gender in blacksmithing followed stricter boundaries. The trade was overwhelmingly male, given its physical demands and association with fire and metal, symbols traditionally linked to masculinity and strength. Yet records reveal women's participation: widows managing workshops after a husband's death, daughters assisting fathers, or wives running accounts and customer relations. In smaller communities, necessity often blurred gender roles, though recognition remained limited. Across all three vocations, hierarchy and apprenticeship reinforced both stability and belonging. The novice learned by imitation, the elder taught through example. This system created continuity of knowledge in a world without mass education. However, it also maintained barriers: class, gender, and institutional control restricted who could advance. Monastic vows excluded the poor without patrons, medical licenses excluded women, and guild fees barred unconnected artisans. The gatekeeping that preserved quality also constrained opportunity. Nevertheless, mentorship cultivated deep bonds of loyalty and respect. The apprentice did not simply acquire skill but absorbed values: discipline, patience, humility. Masters, in turn, found purpose in guiding the next generation. The relationship between teacher and learner was often spiritual as much as technical. Monks trained souls, healers trained hearts, and blacksmiths trained hands. Through these exchanges, identity was shaped not in isolation but within a lineage of labor and devotion. In conclusion, gender hierarchy and apprenticeship defined the fabric of medieval vocational life. Each vocation offered pathways of mastery structured by mentorship and social order. Monks rose through ranks of obedience. Healers inherited the wisdom of experience and compassion. Blacksmiths advanced through years of disciplined craft, while gender and class set boundaries. Dedication and skill allowed individuals to transcend them in small but meaningful ways. The continuity of these vocations rested upon generations who taught, learned, and labored together, binding human progress to the timeless rhythm of instruction, imitation, and transformation. In the medieval world, every form of labor carried spiritual weight. To be a monk, healer, or blacksmith was not merely to perform a profession, it was to participate in the divine rhythm of creation itself. The work of human hands reflected, in miniature, the work of God. Whether one shaped iron, tended the sick, or illuminated sacred texts, labor was an offering, a ritual, and a prayer. Medieval people did not separate the sacred from the practical. In their eyes, the forge, the infirmary, and the cloistered scriptorium were all altars where the soul could find grace. Within the monastery, this belief was explicit. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governed much of monastic life, proclaimed, "Ora et labora, pray and work." Work was a spiritual discipline designed to humble the body and refine the mind. Monks plowed fields, baked bread, copied manuscripts, or brewed ale not for profit but for salvation. The repetition of daily labor, done in silence, became a meditation. Each action, whether binding a book or milking a cow, was infused with purpose, to honor God through diligence and order. The bell that tolled for prayer also marked the rhythm of work. Monks moved seamlessly from psalm to plough, from chapel to workshop. In the scriptorium, copying holy texts was itself a ritual act. The scribe prayed before beginning, asking for steady hands and a pure mind. Every stroke of ink was deliberate. Mistakes were carefully scraped away with a knife, symbolizing the correction of sin. Gold leaf, used in illuminated manuscripts, represented divine light, transforming the page into a window between heaven and earth. In the monastery's infirmary, healing was another sacred labor. Monks saw illness not simply as a physical affliction but as a trial of the soul. To tend the sick was to serve Christ directly, for the Gospels declared, "I was sick and you visited me." Healing thus became both charity and penance. The herbalist monk, grinding roots into poultices, might whisper prayers as he worked, invoking the saints for aid. Every herb was believed to carry not only physical virtue but spiritual resonance. Healers outside the monastery shared this sacramental understanding of their craft. The boundaries between medicine, religion, and magic were porous. Herbs were blessed before use. Charms included the names of saints. Prayers accompanied treatments. Healing invoked the harmony of the natural world, believed to be designed by God for human benefit. To study the properties of plants was, in essence, to study the mind of the Creator. In rural villages, wise women and lay healers often performed rituals that blended faith and folklore. They recited psalms while applying salves, drew the sign of the cross over wounds, and used holy water to cleanse infections. Even the humblest healing act was suffused with meaning. Restoring balance to the body was akin to restoring order to the cosmos. Sickness was not merely a biological misfortune, it was part of a moral and spiritual narrative. Blacksmiths, too, worked in a realm charged with symbolism. Fire, metal, and hammer were not only tools, they were elements of myth and theology. In Christian allegory, fire represented purification. Iron symbolized both strength and suffering. The forge itself was a space of transformation, echoing the purgatorial fires that cleansed souls. To forge metal was to imitate divine creation, to draw form from chaos. Medieval blacksmiths were often respected with a hint of awe, for their mastery of fire bordered on the supernatural. The heat that softened iron could also destroy. The line between creation and destruction was razor-thin. In some regions, blacksmiths were said to have special protection from evil spirits, for demons feared the clang of iron. Horseshoes hung above doors were not merely practical, they were talismans against misfortune. Even the rhythm of hammering carried ritual significance. Each strike was deliberate, almost musical. In some traditions, blacksmiths began their work with a prayer or a small offering, a gesture of humility before the dangerous power they wielded. In their forges, sparks flew like stars, and molten iron glowed like the heart of the earth itself. The blacksmith's craft thus mirrored the divine act of shaping the world from raw matter. This sacred symbolism extended to the objects produced. Monks crafted chalices and reliquaries for worship. Healers prepared ointments believed to carry divine blessing. Blacksmiths forged bells that summoned the faithful to prayer. Each object existed at the intersection of the physical and the spiritual. A bell was not merely an instrument, it was the voice of the church, calling souls to attention. The materials, metal, wood, parchment, became holy through intention and use. In this worldview, idleness was dangerous. To refuse work was to reject divine order. Monks warned that an idle hand is the devil's workshop, while peasants believed laziness invited misfortune. Labor sanctified life, giving structure to days and purpose to suffering. Even hardship was accepted as a test of faith. Blisters, exhaustion, and monotony could be endured if the heart remained fixed on God. The spiritual dimensions of work also shaped attitudes toward craft and art. Medieval artisans rarely signed their creations, for pride was a sin. Beauty was an offering, not a statement of self. A blacksmith who adorned a sword with intricate filigree, or a monk who illuminated a letter with gold, did so in praise of divine perfection. The anonymity of medieval art reflects this humility. All glory was to return to God. Healing, likewise, was understood as divine cooperation. The physician or midwife acted as an instrument, not the source, of restoration. The doctor treats, but God heals, they often said. This acknowledgement of divine partnership underscored the moral duty of care. Compassion itself was sacred labor. To heal the body was to affirm the sanctity of life. The shared thread uniting monks, healers, and blacksmiths was the belief that work, rightly done, transformed both matter and spirit. The forge purified iron, the infirmary purified suffering, the cloister purified thought. Each labor became a vessel of divine energy, contributing to the cosmic order. In a world beset by hardship and uncertainty, this belief offered meaning. Every hammer strike, every prayer, every healing touch was part of the eternal conversation between human effort and divine will. Ultimately, the medieval understanding of work as worship reveals a profound integration of the sacred and the mundane. There was no sharp divide between religion and daily life, between faith and function. Labor was not simply a means to survive, it was a path toward salvation. In each monastery, hut, and forge, people found holiness in the rhythm of work. To them, creation was ongoing, and they were its humble participants, shaping not only the world around them but the soul within. As the Middle Ages progressed into its later centuries, the stability that had defined much of monastic and vocational life began to fracture. The serene rhythm of cloisters, the trust in the healer's touch, and the steady hammering from the village forge were all tested by forces far larger than any one community could control. War, plague, and religious upheaval swept across Europe, forcing even the most secluded monks and humblest artisans to confront a world in turmoil. Yet through chaos came adaptation and a redefinition of what it meant to serve, heal, and create in a changing world. The Hundred Years' War, beginning in the 14th century, shook not only kingdoms but entire social orders. For blacksmiths, war meant both peril and prosperity. Armies needed weapons, armor, and horseshoes. Towns needed fortified gates and tools for defense. The demand for iron surged. In rural villages, blacksmiths who had once made farming tools now crafted swords, spears, and arrowheads. Many were conscripted to follow armies as armorers, setting up portable forges behind the lines to repair weapons in the field. In these makeshift forges, smoke and fire mingled with the scent of blood and dust. The blacksmith's craft became vital to survival. Yet war also consumed resources. Iron that once built plows now made blades. Communities that once thrived on trade now lived under siege. The blacksmith's art, once sacred and creative, became entwined with destruction. Some smiths took pride in their service, seeing it as duty to crown and country. Others lamented the violence their hands enabled. Monks, meanwhile, faced their own crisis. The church, long seen as unshakable, found itself embroiled in corruption, political intrigue, and internal schism. During wartime, monasteries were raided or requisitioned. Soldiers sought shelter or plundered their storerooms. Many monastic communities were forced to flee, their libraries burned or looted. The peaceful isolation that had defined monastic life was shattered. Yet even in crisis, monks sought to serve. Some monasteries became field hospitals, tending to wounded soldiers and refugees. Their herbal gardens provided medicines, their scriptoria produced records, and their hospitality offered rest to the displaced. The vow of stability, once tied to a single location, was tested as monks moved to protect sacred relics and manuscripts. Others turned inward, interpreting the wars as divine punishment for the moral decay of the age. Then came the Black Death, between 1347 and 1351, a calamity so vast that it redefined existence itself. The plague decimated populations, wiping out entire towns and monasteries. Healers, physicians, and monks who cared for the sick often perished themselves. Some communities lost 2/3 of their members. Silence filled the cloisters once alive with chanting. Fields went untended, forges grew cold. For healers, the plague brought both purpose and terror. Medical knowledge proved powerless against the invisible enemy. Traditional remedies, herbs, bloodletting charms failed to stop the contagion. Fear and superstition spread faster than the disease itself. Some healers turned to prayer and penitence. Others experimented desperately, seeking new explanations for infection. The limits of medieval medicine were laid bare. Yet amid despair, compassion endured. Monks risked their lives to bury the dead when others fled. Women healers continued to care for neighbors, even when shunned as potential spreaders of disease. The moral courage of these caregivers stood in quiet defiance of the world's collapse. Their service was often unrecorded, yet it was they who kept a semblance of humanity alive. For blacksmiths, the plague meant a different kind of transformation. With populations reduced, labor became scarce, and wages rose. Surviving smiths found new bargaining power. Guilds, once rigid, adapted to the changing economy, allowing new members and apprentices to fill the void. Demand shifted from war gear to tools for rebuilding. After devastation came reconstruction, and the blacksmith's fire burned again to forge the implements of recovery. Monastic life, however, never fully recovered its earlier vitality. The vast losses of monks and nuns weakened institutions that had stood for centuries. Many monasteries were left deserted or merged with others. The survivors faced questions of purpose. Was isolation still holy in a world crying out for aid? The monastic ideal of contemplation gave way in some places to more active service, teaching, charity, and medical care. A quiet reformation was stirring long before Luther's hammer struck Wittenberg's door. The 15th century brought not only religious doubt but intellectual revival. New ideas about the human body, drawn from rediscovered Greek texts, began to challenge traditional medicine. Healers and physicians studied anatomy more deeply, sometimes in defiance of church taboos. Observation began to rival faith as a means of understanding nature. The healer's role shifted from mystical intermediary to empirical observer. It was a fragile but profound transformation, the beginning of modern medicine's long ascent. Blacksmiths, too, became agents of technological change. As trade revived and cities grew, metalworkers experimented with new alloys, bellows, and furnaces. The production of iron tools expanded, agriculture and architecture alike. Cathedrals rose higher, clock mechanisms turned with precision, and weapons evolved into early firearms. The blacksmith stood at the frontier of innovation, still bound by ancient craft yet now shaping the future of industry. The changing times also redefined moral and spiritual values. Some monks embraced reform movements that called for poverty, purity, and a return to the founding ideals of their orders. Others resisted, clinging to wealth and privilege that alienated the faithful. The Church's internal divisions would soon erupt into schism, and monasteries across Europe would face suppression or secularization. But out of this disintegration came something new: the individual conscience, the idea that faith and work belonged not only to institutions, but to each person's inner calling. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the medieval worldview had fractured, yet the legacy of monks, healers, and blacksmiths remained woven into the fabric of European identity. The monasteries' libraries preserved the wisdom of antiquity. The healer's compassion carried forward the ethics of care. The blacksmith's forge laid the foundation for industry. Each had endured through centuries of conflict, adapting to new realities without losing the sacred essence of their craft. In a sense, their survival mirrored the resilience of the human spirit. War had twisted their purposes, plague had tested their faith, and reform had reshaped their institutions, but they continued. The monk still prayed, the healer still tended, the smith still forged. Through their labor, they reaffirmed the central truth of the medieval imagination, that even in darkness, the work of human hands could still serve the light. As the medieval world gave way to the dawn of modern Europe, the legacies of monks, healers, and blacksmiths did not vanish, they transformed. Their work, born from devotion, discipline, and necessity, became the foundation of entire modern systems, education, medicine, and industry. What began as sacred service continued as secular progress. Yet even centuries later, echoes of their values, humility, purpose, and reverence for craft still resound in the human imagination. In the monasteries of the Middle Ages, monks had preserved not only faith but knowledge. Their relentless copying of manuscripts kept alive the texts of antiquity. Aristotle, Galen, Virgil, and countless others. When the Renaissance arrived, it was built upon libraries that monks had filled, page by page, with words that might otherwise have been lost. The patient rhythm of the scribe's hand became the silent bridge between the ancient and modern worlds. But monastic influence extended far beyond books. The very concept of a university, a place of disciplined study governed by rules and community, grew out of monastic and cathedral schools. The structure of lectures, debates, and moral oversight carried the DNA of the cloister. Even the notion of academic degrees echoes the monastic hierarchy of novice, brother, and abbot. Though the monasteries declined, their intellectual spirit endured, reborn in the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. The monastic ethos of routine and discipline also found new life in the modern work ethic. The Benedictine ideal of ora et labor, pray and work, became, over centuries, a cultural cornerstone. What had once been devotion to God became, in secular form, devotion to craft, duty, and vocation. The monk's humility before his labor evolved into the craftsman's pride and excellence, and the scholar's pursuit of truth. The modern idea that work has moral value, that diligence ennobles the soul, can trace its ancestry to those cloistered lives. For healers, the transformation was equally profound. The medieval healer's blend of faith and herbal knowledge gradually gave way to a more empirical approach. Universities began to formalize medical education. Anatomy was studied systematically, and observation replaced superstition. Yet the essence of medieval healing, the compassion, the sense that tending to the sick was a moral duty, survived. In hospitals, this continuity was clear. Many of the earliest hospitals were monastic foundations, rooted in charity rather than profit. Even as science advanced and medicine became professionalized, the idea that the healer's first obligation was mercy remained. The modern physician's oath, the nurse's vocation, and the humanitarian ideal of care for all these have spiritual ancestors in the monks who tended plague victims and the wise women who delivered children in candlelit huts. The herbal lore of medieval healers also persisted. Though refined and tested through science, much of modern pharmacology has its roots in medieval herbals. Willow bark became aspirin, foxglove became digitalis, honey and vinegar remained antiseptics. The medieval understanding of plants as God's gifts evolved into modern biochemistry's recognition of natural compounds. What had once been framed as divine wisdom became scientific discovery, but the sense of wonder endured. For blacksmiths, their legacy shaped the physical world itself. The forge, that ancient altar of fire, became the heart of technological civilization. From medieval smithies came the metallurgical expertise that built bridges, engines, and machines. The blacksmith's mastery over metal evolved into the engineer's mastery over matter. Without the incremental innovations of medieval metalworkers, stronger steels, improved furnaces, precise tools, that industrial revolution could never have ignited. Yet even as industry transformed the forge into the factory, the symbolic power of the blacksmith remained. The rhythmic sound of hammer on anvil still evokes creation, endurance, and craftsmanship. The blacksmith became an archetype in folklore and literature. The tireless maker, the shaper of destiny. From Vulcan and Wayland to modern craftsmen and artists, the lineage of the forge continues as a metaphor for human creativity and resilience. There is, too, a moral continuity linking these medieval vocations. Each represented service, whether to God, to the sick, or to the community. The monk sought spiritual health, the healer physical health, the blacksmith material strength. Together, they formed a triad of balance, contemplation, compassion, and craft. In an age before specialization, these roles reminded society that survival required both soul and skill, both prayer and practice. As modernity advanced, the sacred faded but did not disappear. The workshop, the hospital, and the classroom each inherited something of the monastery's solemnity. Even now, in the hum of machines, the silence of libraries, or the stillness of a surgical ward, there lingers an echo of medieval devotion, a sense that labor well done carries a moral weight, that knowledge demands humility, and that creation is itself an act of reverence. If one listens closely, the continuity becomes almost audible. The turning of a lathe echoes the rhythm of a hammer. The careful precision of a surgeon mirrors the steady hand of the monastic scribe. The modern scientist, too, works in quiet isolation, seeking truth, as the monk once sought divine understanding. The lineage of labor, discipline, and wonder remains unbroken. Even the crises of modern times, the pandemics, wars, and upheavals, recall those faced by their medieval predecessors. Then as now, the healer stands at the bedside, the maker rebuilds the broken, and the contemplative searches for meaning amid confusion. The tools have changed, the spirit endures. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the medieval monk, healer, and blacksmith, not their specific crafts, but their shared faith in the value of purposeful work. They lived in a world that saw no division between the sacred and the ordinary. Every action, no matter how small, was part of a cosmic order. Today, though the divine framework may differ, the belief that labor can reveal truth, compassion, and beauty still guides us. Their world may seem distant, but its imprint remains in our hands, minds, and hearts. Every time we write, mend, or build, we repeat gestures refined over centuries of devotion. The monk's quiet prayer, the healer's careful touch, and the blacksmith's steady blow all live within the continuum of human striving. The medieval belief that work ennobles the spirit endures not as superstition, but as truth, one proved by generations of hands that shaped both faith and the world. And so, as the last embers of the medieval forge fade, and the last echoes of monastic bells dissolve into time, what remains is the essence of their labor, that to create, to care, and to contemplate are all acts of love. Across 1,000 years, the soul of their work still burns steady, humble, and luminous, reminding us that even the simplest labor, done with heart and meaning, is a spark of the divine.